Good afternoon, and welcome back to the final session of AgTech Next 2021. For this discussion, we seek to understand how we can deliver innovation and impact through collaborative partnerships. Thank you to our longtime partners, the sponsors of this conversation, Lewis & Clark Agri-Food and Husch Blackwell. So, how do we build long-term relationships that create lasting impact? Let's find out. I'll turn it back over to our moderator, Joseph Apoku Gakpo. Over to you, Joseph.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and good afternoon from us here in St. Louis, Missouri. Good morning and good evening to everybody, depending on the part of the world you find yourselves. Welcome to the final session of the AgTech Next 2021 conference. The conference over the last few months has been on the broad theme, climate change, seeing things differently. A while ago, we heard from the Chief Executive Officer of the Bill and Melinda Gates Agricultural Innovations, Dr. Joe Cornelius, who spoke on the consequences of coming up short on climate change. He specifically discussed agricultural innovations for climate adaptation and resilience. This panel will be seeking to put into perspective how to ensure collaboration and co-development for agricultural innovation in a way that achieves sustainable impact, particularly for the smallholder farmer. Dr. Cornelius noted how agricultural innovations in the global north routinely ignore the global south, which must be addressed. He called on policymakers in the global south to then also do the best that they can to then support smallholder farmers, and also spoke about what his organization would also be doing to help support smallholder farmers. He made the point that modernizing Africa and Southeast Asia's agriculture in the face of a changing climate will require significant investment in irrigation, better roads, better seeds, markets, and also he spoke about the need for upgraded crop storage facilities that can help prevent spoilage and also food waste. And so in this session, we're asking the question, how can the development of these innovations be done collaboratively in a co-developed manner so they will be effective in helping deal with these climate change related challenges? And we have an international panel here to help us address this particular subject. In no particular order, let me go ahead and introduce them. My good friend, Dr. Rose Gidado from Nigeria is joining us. Dr. Gidado is Deputy Director at the National Biotechnology Development Agency in Nigeria. She's also Country Coordinator of the Open Forum on Agricultural Biotechnology. She holds a doctorate degree in industrial microbiology from the University of Abuja. And she works essentially to help introduce agricultural innovations like biotechnology to various farmers in her country. Dr. Gidado, thanks very much for joining us from Nigeria on what I think is a very warm Abuja night. I know it's past 9 p.m., and so we're really glad that you made it this time.
Thank you so much, Joseph. I'm happy to be here this evening, and I'm so elated to be part of this.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone.
Sure. Also joining us is Dr. Catherine Taracha, all the way from Kenya. Catherine is the head of crop biotechnology at the Kenya Agricultural and Livestock Research Organization. She holds a PhD in biochemistry and biotechnology from the Kenyatta University. And Catherine works to empower resource-poor farmers with effective agricultural practices. Thank you very much for your time this evening in Kenya. Catherine.
Thank you, Joseph. I'm happy to be here.
Also joining us is Dr. Pooja Bhatnagar Mathur. Pooja is Principal Scientist and Precision Genetics Lead at the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center Summit, which is part of the CGIAR. Pooja holds a PhD in biotechnology and has been working on improving crops for more than 15 years now. Thanks for joining us, Pooja.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you for having me here today for this interesting conversation.
Thanks to you too. And our final panel member is a man whose love for smallholder farmers know no bounds. Dr. Don McKenzie is Executive Director at the Institute for International Crop Improvement here at the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center. Don and his team work to translate key discoveries in plant science into new solutions for food quality and availability in the developing world. He holds a PhD in biochemistry from the University of British Columbia. And his favorite quote is, "Plant science is a great tool to improve people's lives and livelihoods." Don, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Joseph, and welcome again to the Danforth Center.
It's really great to be here and to have this very international panel around for this all-exciting conversation. Let's get the conversation underway now. My panel members have assured they will keep their responses brief and straight to the point. They'll be sharing remarks between 2 to 3 minutes so we can have as many questions as possible come through. And to the audience online, we want to hear from you. As I've been indicating, this is an audience-driven conversation. No questions are off limits. They can answer them. You either direct it to one of them, or I'll help you decide who answers it. And so submit your question using the Ask Your Question Here button right on your computer screen. But before we get to the questions from the audience and elsewhere, I have this opening question for all 4 of our panel members. When we speak of co-development of technologies by institutions in the developed world and in the developing world for the benefit of smallholder farmers, what would a good model to achieve co-development look like if impact can be made and sustained going forward? Pooja, take the first shots, and then we hear from the other members of the panel.
Joseph, it was great listening to Joe talking about the 3 rules in his talk, right? Peace, scale, and growth. And I believe that, an effective strategy for co-development would require an in-depth overview and increased understanding of the country and regional agriculture needs. A healthy balance of national and regional level research is essential for maximizing the impact of our national agriculture research systems. Although many NARs are seeing benefits from partnering with other NARs in the region and advanced institutes to develop ecosystems that make possible for the local researchers to develop and scale up the innovations in their countries as well as in the regions. I believe that beside having a strong capacity in research and development, the ability to innovate is related to a collective action. And of course, that would require coordination, exchange of knowledge among diverse actors in not only national, but regional as well as global agriculture programs. It is also equally important to have distinct partnership strategies and operational plans to not only form multi-stakeholder innovation platforms, but also to create planning capacities for increasing effective use of resources for co-developing the technologies. Just to cite one example, which is closer to my domain of biotech, is the co-development of precision genetic technologies based on genome editing tools. Rather than upfront investing in actual editing capacity in every single country with individual NARs, each at different stages of capacity development, I believe it would be better to create the regional hubs that would be more effective in providing those allelic variations or the lines that could be then shared with the NARs, both strong as well as the weaker NARs for accelerated breeding and hybrid creation. Of course, this would need support in form of resources, capabilities, and that allow the local researchers to handle both in-country as well as regional activities.
So what I'm hearing is a good balance between global interests and the very local interests, among other points you made there. Catherine?
Absolutely.
Catherine, your thoughts on what a good model would look like?
Thank you. I think a good model would involve collaborative research. That means different partners globally, as opposed to just one institution locally trying to carry out the research. This would, of course, involve different institutions partnering together. And in these different institutions, there'd also be multidisciplinary teams which would deal with different aspects of the research. So during the co-development process, all these collaborating partners would be involved in the concept development, in the innovation, in the proof, in the implementation, and in the launching, all done together as a team.
Key point there. Again, I'm hearing with and death, a good balance between the two in terms of how diverse and how much in depth. Dr. Gidado, how would a good model look like?
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. I think most of the points have been mentioned, but let me just add a little. Apart from having a very good team, different institutions coming together, and each institution playing very, very key and partner roles, we also need to have a communication strategy laid in place. Communication is key. It drives, the whole process from the beginning to the end. Yeah, before the project makes an impact. Of course, people need to know about it right from the onset. So with communication, I think everything will go well. A typical example that we have here in Nigeria is the delivery of the product, the pod borer resistant cowpea that started many, many years ago. I think about, it took 40 years, I can say. It's a whole research process, and it involves so many development partners, scientists, award, different institutions, international, national, even at the local level. And so we had a very, very strong, and a vibrant communication strategy in place, starting from the onset of the project. And today we have delivered, a baby, and the farmers are actually happy and excited about it. And of course, with communication, good communication in place, sustainability will not be a problem because we have to keep on, talking about it, creating awareness and starting telling people about the projects for more adoption by farmers, and then for consumer acceptance. Consumer acceptance is also very, very useful before the project makes impact and becomes, highly sustainable. Of course, we need to, maintain those, and then stewardship. A good stewardship in place actually will make it more sustainable.
So it requires good partnerships, and communication is very crucial. Communication is something, as a journalist, I'll definitely associate it with broadly. Rose, thanks very much. Don?
Thanks, Joseph. I think your question is really pertinent as we're sitting here today in the middle of a very vibrant agricultural innovation ecosystem, surrounded by thousands of scientists, by hundreds of bioscience companies and that with access to investment capital, and within a 500-mile radius of 50% of the United States agricultural production. So I go back to what Dr. Cornelius was mentioning in his keynote about the focus on innovation systems, not so much just innovative products. And I think, how can we work to create innovation systems in the Global South? Systems that bring together the National Agricultural Research Institutes, the international research institutes, such as those of the CGIAR, bring together small and large technology developers and entrepreneurs, include the seed sector, also include farmer associations and organizations to come together. How could we replicate, if you will, or emulate a 39 North agricultural ecosystem that exists here, but do that in the Global South? One example that's worth pointing out is Biosciences Eastern and Central Africa, otherwise known as BECA, which is located in Nairobi on the International Livestock Research Institute campus. And BECA was created with the idea in mind to bring together African researchers to work on problems for Africa, to create solutions that would have regional impact. I think that idea was a great idea. It still is a great idea. I think we need to think about how can it be better implemented, perhaps. But it's one way of looking at the solution.
But we are all very much aware that different partners may have different interests. The farmer's interests may somehow be different from the researcher's interests. And the larger the number of partners, the broader the number of areas in terms of interests that need to be served. Is there always that common ground that always come out that then they all can revolve around and do stuff as broad partners, you think?
Yeah. And it really helps to make sure that the solutions that are being worked on, as we heard earlier, that need to be market-driven and responsive to smallholder farmer needs and that.
Many thanks for those thoughts, Don. To move on, delving a bit into how these models, as you've described them, could possibly look best to get the innovation to the smallholder farmers. Pooja, what are some of the bottlenecks that you think need to be resolved for these partnerships to be effective in delivering the various technologies to the smallholder farmers?
Thank you for that question, Joseph. Over the past 2 to 3 decades, while agriculture research has made commendable shift towards being more participatory and less rigid, there are still many projects that are still designed and implemented with little flexibility or adaptive management. So I believe that's one of the bottlenecks that needs to be addressed if we really are serious about delivering technologies to smallholder farmers. And an emerging paradigm is actually a critique of a classical top-down approach where the scientists create the technologies and then hand it over to the extensionist in the national systems to transfer these to the farmers. And this approach, while worked for a lot of years, as we see this change, there is very little success or limited success in a complex and high-risk heterogeneous environments where most of the smallholders live, whether it is South Asia, Southeast Asia, or Africa for that matter. And the demand for technologies that in these geographies are embedded in the local knowledge of constraints and opportunities. So a bottom-up participatory approach is something that I believe we have seen that it has already started to emerge strongly, where the research is more responsive to the demand and what the complex environment or the farmer demands, and not just coming from the researchers. And it is also a little challenging on, or maybe what needs to be done is the best way to engage with the private sector. Can you hear me?
Yes, Pooja, we can hear. Maybe it would help that Rose and Catherine mute your microphones even as we go through the conversation with the other panel, because it looks like that's where the reactions are coming from. Pooja, go ahead and round up for me, please.
Okay, yeah, so what I was saying is that maybe the best way to engage with private sector for enhancement of science and delivery of technology for smallholder farmers is still a space that needs to be worked on. And lastly, maybe, the seed delivery pathways. The global R4D systems still struggle with that, where to draw the line in terms of, the direct involvement of international centers like CGIAR, what Don just mentioned in terms of delivering the technology, whether CG should be delivering the technologies, and the capacity of many national partners to take over this delivery and scaling effectively. So that is something that really needs a little bit of more thought as we move into more challenging, circumstances. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Pooja. And I really want to hear from our colleagues from the Global South on this bit about the challenges. But Don, I can't help but come to you at this juncture. The point Pooja makes about the very top-down kind of approach in the delivery of some of these innovations, how do we avoid that?
So how we try and deal with it in the projects that we're working on is we're always a partner. So we're always one player in the band, if you will. And almost all of our projects are being led either by a national research organization in country or a regional partner in Africa, such as AATF and others. So that those partners are giving us a lot of the input into what are the important problems that smallholders are facing, and that helps to guide the direction of the research. And very much the projects are, country-led, if you will, and led by the local partners.
So the National Agricultural Research Organization, it's come up in the points that Don just made. It's come up in previous conversations. So how do they get involved in the redesigning of some of these initiatives appropriately to then help ensure that we don't have that top-down approach? Catherine, you work with one of these national research organizations in Kenya. So take a shot at that for us. What role can these national research organizations play in the technology delivery process so that then it's not all top-down, but then we see a bit of the bottom-up as well?
Thank you. The role that the National Research Organization can play is really to own the process, yes? And we start with the farmer, find out the problem from the farmer, and then work towards an innovation to solving the farmer's problems, as opposed to coming with the innovation and then trying to get the farmer to adopt the innovation. So I think that's another way that we can deal with that.
So Catherine, you are working on the genetically modified cassava project in Kenya. Tell us a bit more about that, and maybe what are the technologies that you think farmers need in order to be able to become climate resilient, and how things could be done differently in that regard in terms of helping introduce some of these technologies, particularly through the national research organizations.
Thank you. Yes, we are working on the genetically modified cassava on a project known as Virus-Resistant Cassava Plus. This is a project that involves over 6 institutes. Of course, we have KAURO in Kenya, we have NACRI in Nigeria, NARO in Uganda, and Donald Danforth Center where you are. We also have SciFord in Uganda, and ISA is one of our partners. We have been able to develop this cassava resistant to 2 devastating diseases. We've taken it through the greenhouse and evaluated in the field for over 5 years. It's been taken through regulatory studies for biosafety and environmental safety studies. And now we're ready for environmental. We have gotten an approval from a regulatory body known as National Biosafety Authority for environmental release. So we are actually now ready for national performance trials, which are carried out by a regulatory body before release to farmers. I'd also like to say this is the first time that cassava is being released, environmentally released in the world. The other technologies I would like to see that are needed, especially in the wake of climate change, especially in Kenya, we do have emergent diseases and pests, and such as maize lethal necrosis disease and the fall armyworm. And we need to develop crops which are resistant to drought in the face of climate change and resistant to diseases and pests as mitigation to this climate change and emerging pests and diseases. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. So genetic modification is one of the tools, and then you make the point about the others that could possibly then be used. But Rose, so the technologies could be varied depending on what situation has to be dealt with. Then a decision will be taken on which tool can be used. But how do we avoid the kind of backlash that ends up painting some of these technologies, like genetic engineering that we heard Catherine speak of, like improved seeds, among others, as foreign technologies, foreign in quotes, when scientists in the developed world work with those in the developing countries to then co-develop some of these tools for smallholder farmers?
Okay, thank you for that question. I think the fundamental issue that actually gets back to such a backlash, is the fact that our scientists do not speak out. They don't talk about what they're doing. They don't take ownership. So it's good to take ownership. It's good to also invest. So much our government to also own it up. So that's why people look at the technology as a foreign technology or those improved seeds, especially the cowpea that we have. The cowpea is a Nigerian variety of cowpea that was actually improved. It's not a foreign, seed or a foreign crop. It's an indigenous crop. But the anti-GM group, the environmentalists still see it as a crop, that is not indigenous to Nigeria or Africa or what. And it's, so people tend to lose confidence in our scientists because our scientists are not really taking ownership. So they need to own up, they need to talk about it, they need to communicate, to people. And that's why I'll keep on harping on the fact that communication is an integral part. It should be an integral part of every project, that that you want the project to impact upon the people. Because if the project does not impact, it doesn't get, to the end users, to the farmers or consumers, then the research is of no use. So let our scientists really take ownership, talk about it, be proud of it, so that people can have confidence in them. They should repose, the confidence, so that they can repose the confidence, in them. People will have confidence about what they're doing, and they will believe in it. They will believe that, yes, our Nigerian scientists are actually working. And then, because technology no country is independent. We all depend on one another. You can borrow a technology and indigenize it, make it your own, because so that you can use it to develop your own indigenous crops, like we are doing. So that we don't, allow the environmentalists to actually take over, what we're doing. And then at the end of the day, when you come out with a product, the products, the consumers will not actually accept it, because if the other side of the table, if we allow them to overwhelm us, with all the lies that they, spread with their rumor mongering and all those things, it will actually remain like this. So we need to sit up as scientists. We need to talk about it, what we're doing and what, is it for, and the impact that it's going to make. And because presently, farmers are actually feeling the impact of the cowpea and the BT cotton here in Nigeria. They're excited about it. It's useful. It's high yielding, and the gene is highly efficacious. And so farmers are really, really, happy, and their livelihood, of course, in the next 2 years will be improved. There'll be better people, because beans is actually eaten in every household. Is a meat for the poor. Most of the rural populace they don't afford animal protein because it's expensive. Most of their diets are carbohydrate based, but with this cowpea or beans, of course, in their diets, I think is actually very helpful in terms of nutrition.
Catherine, something that Rose touched on, just to hear from you on that briefly before I move on to other members of the panel. National ownership and the local organizations and the local scientists and the national research institutions taking ownership and control of that whole exercise to then introduce the technology. What are your thoughts on how you, the scientists, can do that differently from how it's been done over the years, so that then we don't see the backlash?
Okay. Thank you, Joseph. What's very important is capacity building of the scientists in the development of the innovation of the product. That way, the scientists have the confidence that they own the product. And then in a project which is a multi-institutional, is to allow the scientists to be involved in each and every step, from concept development up to the deployment of the product to the farmer. And also by encouraging the scientists that are leading the research to source for resources, not to just solely rely on the project, grants. If they can also source for some money and put it into the project, then they'll feel that they really own, there'll be ownership of that product or innovation. Thank you.
Key point there, so capacity building for the scientists who are leading some of these initiatives, so that they can do things beyond the grant that they get in order to make much more difference in the lives of their farmers. Let's move the conversation in other directions, and I'll come back to you, Dawn. Your organization does develop some of these innovations and work with your colleagues in the Global South to get them to smallholder farmers. The question then is, in helping and working towards developing some of these projects, how much flexibility do you build into these initiatives so that then they can appropriately accommodate the expectations, the thoughts, the ideas of the governments, the policymakers, and the farmers in some of these countries in the Global South that you work with?
Okay. Well, as much as we can. But I think you're quite right. I think that, beyond the very narrow objective of trying to deliver a specific technology or an intervention to farmers, that there's an expectation that there will be ancillary benefits from the project. Catherine's already mentioned capacity building and that. And I think there are those expectations that there would be opportunities for training or for building up other capabilities that would be useful outside of the narrow remit of the project. And I'll give a couple of examples. And one of them is with the virus-resistant cassava project that Catherine has already talked about. We had the flexibility within that project to be able to provide scientists such as Dr. Humo Akawa from Nigeria, Dr. Henry Wagaba from Uganda, Catherine as well from Calro, with the opportunity to come to the Danforth Center for the purposes of either completing their PhD degrees or on fellowships and that. So that was a spin-off, if you will, from the project. And Catherine and Henry and Ahumo are now in senior leadership positions within the project, very much in the driver's seat as we're trying to move the project to the final stages of delivery. Another example is a partnership that we formed with the National Agricultural Seeds Council in Nigeria, NASC. They are the seed regulatory body responsible for seed certification, as well as for enforcement or implementation of the Plant Varieties Protection Act in Nigeria. So we've been working very closely with their head of the molecular diagnostics lab to help build up the capability of NASC to do the necessary trait purity testing, quality testing of the BT cowpea seed that's now just been released for commercial sale in Nigeria. So that's another way of sort of working and building up ancillary capabilities in the organizations that are really going to be critical to the commercial success of a product in country.
Key points there. Pooja, I'm wondering, so these examples that are being cited, you work with the CGIAR, and you guys do very marvelous, globally focused, but locally adaptive kind of agricultural innovations work. Are these examples of the ways around it in terms of the capacity building, the cross-country training that you can identify with? And are these some of the mechanisms you are probably applying at SIGA? Are there more examples of how this could possibly work that you could tell us about?
Certainly, Joseph. As the principal role of CGIAR is to strengthen the work of national programs and by undertaking activities that are complementary and non-competitive, right? That's most important. And over years, CGIAR and NAS partnerships have worked symbiotically and synergistically towards collective impact. And one of the biggest impact, or I would say the approach that CJ has used for several decades now is creating the innovation platforms. And by creating these innovation platforms, the CGIAR NARS partners have been able to enhance the multi-stakeholder collaborations for the various R4D programs. And that has been the most effective way for, actually rooting the agriculture research in the local context. So that actually the innovation platforms by themselves challenge the normal way of working, and the research organizations set the agenda for the development donors, the work with the farming communities for the implementation of the project. And not only these facilitate the interaction and the collaboration between the local, regional, as well as global organization, they also rope in the private sector players, the governments, the non-governmental agencies, the policymakers, as well as the farmer organizations in the agriculture system. So that, I believe, is a very critical contribution, or I would say the CG has been able to work with the national programs. One example that I can probably cite here is, under the CGIAR research program on grain, legumes, and dryland cereals, through the partnership of Alliance of Biodiversity International, CIET and PABRA programs, the programs like projects like IPMA and TAT projects have really been able to build strong partnerships. And with these projects, they have been able to contextualize actually the bean innovation platforms that continue to enhance the bean businesses and also improve nutrition. And they have been made really remarkable progress in achieving the deliverables by these multi-stakeholder collaborations.
In a while, I'll get to Rose for a response to a question around how to nurture a good policy environment so that then some of these innovations can eventually get to the farmers. But just briefly, you touched on the private sector and the role that they can play. Briefly, what's that overarching role that you think they can play in some of these processes to get the innovations to farmers?
Can you come again, Joseph? I missed your last part.
So I'm making the point, Pooja, that the private sector, you touched on them a while ago. What role do you think they can play in these processes to get the innovations to farmers?
I believe the partnerships with private sectors are very critical for delivery. They are actually the vehicle to delivery. And these viable partnerships develop only when the interest of the public and the private sector overlap, as determined by the technologies, the markets, and the public demands in the innovation, supply, and the value chain, right? So, of course, that gets to a point on how to engage the private sector. I believe they can be engaged in multiple points. For example, they can deliver the technical enablement, like Monsanto, for example, did with the WEMA for markers and the Corteva's support to CIMMYT on editing the maize, sorghum, and pearl millets for other CGI centers. There are several capabilities that are better sourced through private sector who invest liberally in rapid technical evolution. So that's one of the important area. And also there's this last stage of innovation where I think I alluded to it, private sector can be a very big partner there. Engaging the private sector on market demand creation is very, very important. They have intimate knowledge of clients' needs and the market trends, and hence can play a critical role in scaling of technologies in relation to the market-oriented agriculture development.
Key points there. Pooja, thanks very much. If these technologies can be scaled up, obviously the appropriate policy environment is needed. And so I'll get to Rose. Dr. Cornelius referenced the work that you've done in Nigeria to bring the BT cowpea to farmers. Don mentioned that as well a while ago. And sometimes we have these challenges emerge where the innovations get developed and then they never get to the farmers. They either get stuck in the labs or at the trial sites, and then it sits there almost forever. So Rose, how can all these partners in the space create and nurture that appropriate policy environment to ensure that the innovations move beyond the lab and into the hands of farmers eventually, based on your own experience with the BT cowpea projects and other projects in Nigeria? Rose, looks like you've not unmuted, so kindly do that for me. Okay, there you go.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for this very important question. Getting those innovative technologies to the farmers has actually been our problems, especially with public institutions in Nigeria. And most times, those researches are not niche driven. That's one. Like once in a while, not need driven. There is a gap between the public institutions and the policymakers, themselves, and then the industry. There's no link. That link is not there. And then sometimes it's resources. Most of the public institutions, they carry out their research, and when it gets to commercialization, they don't have the resources. Sometimes, yes, they get to the varietal release committee, they are able to release the crops, but some of the seeds are there lying on the shelves because they don't have the money, the resources, to scale it up and then take it and maybe get it to the private sector. Because before you actually get it to the private sector, there are certain things that you have to do, for farmers' adoption. You have to establish, demonstration plots on the farmer's field. The farmer is a practical person. He doesn't just accept, a new technology like that. He has to see that that technology is working. And so carrying out those, establishment of those demonstration plots is actually a capital-intensive venture. So most of these breeders, they don't have that, resources enough to do it because it's public institution, because the government does not invest that much. If the government, before they show interest in any seed, or crop or any technology, there must be vested interest. And so if it's not there, it's always, a problem. And that's why we have so many seeds that have been improved and they're just, lying there. They've been improved and they have been approved for commercial release, but then they are there. And then the industry, there's no connect, between the industry and the public sector.
Yeah.
And so it's actually been a problem. So and then here again, we need communication, advocacy, advocacy, so that people will get to know, so that the private sector too, or will get to know, or the seed companies or what, so that they can step in. Okay. So the problems are just they're just these ones that I've actually identified.
Yeah, it's
one of the it's the main thing, and so that partnership also we need the partnership between the public private sector and and those seed companies.
Key point there. So co-development must take into consideration the interest of the farmers, the players in the private sector, the governments in the public sector and all. But again, and I'll come to you, Catherine, in trying to get the co-development processes underway, how does some of these co-development processes take into account the interest of the minority and the not so powerful groups like women? How do we ensure that the interest of women in particular are properly served in some of these co-development processes?
Thank you. As I said before, the virus-resistant cassava plus project has normally involves all the various stakeholders from the onset of the project, be they policymakers, processors, entrepreneurs, the government, and especially the farmers. So what we don't want is to develop a technology, and then when we have the innovation, package it, and then give it to the farmer. So we have made sure that various stakeholders, especially the farmers, visit the trials in the field where the cassava is being evaluated, and especially women, we've brought in gender. And the farmers, the women farmers have been involved in evaluating the cassava, like intercropping. There are some farmers that actually like intercropping the cassava with other crops. And so they've been able to evaluate various characteristics such as the foliage, the branching. Is the cassava growing in such a way, the characteristic that there will be shading of the other crop that they intercrop with? Some communities eat the cassava leaves. is there enough foliage that they'll be able to get enough cassava leaves for their vegetables? They've been able to evaluate that. The women are the ones who normally plant and then harvest the cassava. The men might be involved in marketing. So they've been also involved at harvest, and they've been able to evaluate the roots, the root structure, the shape, the ease of peeling, and the quantity of starch that might be found in the root. So in this way, we've been able to involve the women, especially. We've taken gender into account in the project and involved those people who are, as not so powerful groups, minority groups like the women.
That's nice to know that those considerations are made even in the co-development processes, in some of the processes to then introduce innovations and technology to various farmers. Pooja, there's been a lot of conversation about smallholder farmers, but the other reality, as we've come to know it, is that yes, they would produce and consume portions of what they've produced, but they will sell the rest eventually. And in terms of the sale, it is those consumers outside the space, in terms of those who don't produce food themselves, who have to buy if the economic might of the smallholder farmer would be improved in the end. So just to get a sense from you, how does the interest of the final consumer play into the whole conversation around the efforts to empower the smallholder producer?
That's a very good question, Joseph. And to answer this, I would like to quote the authors of this recently published book, Innovation Revolution in Agriculture. And the authors persuasively argue that the innovation requires business models that create and deliver the value to the users, to the society, and to the investors. And obviously, interacting with the market and the clarifying the user needs is the place to start, not the other way around. Not that the technology is developed and then you start looking for who are the stakeholders or who are the consumers, right? So the technology interventions should aim at developing consumer or customer preferred traits that are able to be rapidly adopted. To achieve this, a clear understanding of the farmers, the urban population, the processors needs to be, done, and to identify these target traits. In CG, with support from the Excellence in Breeding Initiative, all the crop improvement interventions are now being framed from a user pull mindset, with strong commitment to establish and nourish the CGIAR NARS networks instead of CGIAR and NARS breeding efforts as individual efforts, right? And that's the way to go, I believe. One of the examples that I can cite from my research is the work that we are doing around developing precision genetic technologies to address the issue of rancidity in milled pearl millet. We all know that the rapid onset of off flavors and the taste within 5 to 7 days of milled peanut flour actually poses major hindrance for its consumer acceptability, creates post-harvest losses, and cause drudgery to the users, particularly the women folk, because they have to grind it almost every 2 to 3 days, and that's why the urban youth and women are actually not very keen on using pearl millet meal now. So that has been a challenge. And obviously, considering that this problem is the mother of all problems in pearl millet, tackling the issue of increasing the shelf life is a very important intervention to increase the suitability of this climate smart cereal for health, nutrition, and food security. So that is the kind of, the target traits, the researchers, the multi-stakeholder innovation partners, partnership models have to be created so that, we are not just looking at the farmer preferred traits, but also the consumer preferred traits,
Sure.
like these.
Very key point there. And Rose, isn't that where it gets more interesting in terms of the consumer interest? And again, I repeatedly want to draw on your own experience with the introduction of BT cowpea and other biotech crops in Nigeria. And in trying to get practical in the efforts to then serve the consumer's interests, there are those situations where the environment could be very hostile to the adoption of some technologies, like the biotech technology, for example. So yourself and your colleague scientists have worked with scientists in the global north to then bring some of these biotech crops to smallholder producers there. And of course, after the production of the cowpea, some will be in the markets, which will then be consumed by people out there on the streets. But sometimes there is a sense that the environment is hostile to technologies like genetic engineering specifically. How do you deal with that when you have that kind of hostile environment to a certain innovation that you would want to introduce?
Yeah, it's this is a very good one. It's I don't know how to describe it, but I have learned to live with it. Not just me, but all of us in the biotechnology space. We are getting used to it now. It's not easy dealing with those people because they are all on pay. They are on maybe the Greenpeace payroll also. They get their salaries from there, and I know that they will not stop. And as they will not stop, we too will not stop. These days, most times what we do when they do their negative publications, because they get to even Mr. President, they use all manner of publications, the social media, they use the radio, TV and all, and I think all of us, because if they see us, if we organize any workshop or sensitization or pay a visit to a minister or what, the next you will hear is they are there also. They visit governors, they visit, So, but it doesn't stop us from making our points because this is a technology that has delivered. And our own happiness is that farmers are happy with it, And I'm sure even the consumers will be happy with it because by next year, we should have the cowpea in the markets, in the stores, in the world, because this is harvest period. And no one who has planted it has complained. All those people that planted it, even on a very small scale, they are all happy with it, with the yield, and they're happy with them not doing the sprays that they used to do. The number of sprays used to be 8, but now they can only do 2 sprays. And so that's the reduction in cost, of chemicals, having to buy, spray many times and what, the frustration, the drudgery, the what. So all those things are now being reduced. So it's very easy to cultivate cowpea. And that deficit that the country had before, the 500,000 metric tons deficit that is being made up by importation. And that importation is 16 billion naira is spent every year. So with this now, even the government is happy with it because, we are no longer going to import. Importation will reduce, importation will reduce, and we are saving costs and we are, earning foreign exchange. So the advantages, actually, our strength is in the advantages. The advantages outweigh the risk is involved in this thing. And we know that with climate change, it is real. People are experiencing it. And this particular crop, both the cotton and the cowpea, they're highly resilient. The seeds are resilient. If you plant, even if it does not rain immediately, even if it takes 3 weeks to rain, once it rains, we get germination, 100% germination. So the advantages are just too numerous, to mention. They're just, it's just a lot. And then the early maturation, it makes it climate smart. So we keep on making our points. We keep on making our points. We carry out campaign, advocacy, lobbying, influencing, what. So we have a good policy environment now. The policymakers are actually in support. I know the vaccine hesitancy actually helped us because they understood that yes, these people are liars, talking about GMOs. And look at the vaccine, the same thing happened. But the vaccine is not killing anybody. So, and then their points, most of the time, they don't even change. I mean, it's the same points that they make. What the argument they will do today is the same argument they will do the following year, year in, year out, is the same. And mostly they're all lies. They partner with institutions, they partner with some civil society groups, they partner with the religious group, and then they carry out, maybe a sensitization or what. At the end of the day, they will do their rubbish publications, telling lies and all these things. So we are into an all-inclusive communication, strategy. So we don't leave any stone unturned. And then the Biosafety Act actually gives us powers. The act is, all vested in the office of the Director General, giving approvals and what. I think this is where our strength lies, actually. So because there's nothing they have not done.
Yeah.
They've gone to the National Assembly, that's the Parliament, to see that the bill, the act, the Biosafety Act, is repealed. But nobody is giving them, any attention again. They don't get attention anymore because we have discovered, everyone has discovered that they are all liars. Because what they say is unfounded, it's not scientific. We base our facts on science and all those things. And so I think we're equal to the task where there's no going back. Yeah. And now that we have products at hand, the products are speaking for us. Yeah. That's just.
I know that Rose can be very passionate when she discusses the role that anti-GMO groups are playing in stalling the efforts that she and others are taking to introduce GM crops in her country and elsewhere. I know she can be very passionate when she discusses that, and so then you would hear her describe some of those with those groups in some of those words. But then it's just a sense I get of a certain frustration in terms of how she's making that point. But Dawn, is that probably the hardest part of your job in terms of trying to get the innovations across, in terms of the kind of pushback that's seen by groups? And just to broaden it a bit, from your perspective as a scientist working in the global north in trying to deliver innovations to smallholder farmers in the global south, what would you say are some of the major hurdles that need to be scaled in order to allow for that to happen?
Mm-hmm. So Rose has certainly touched on some of the aspects around the policy environment and the special interest groups and the role that they play. But I think that, one of the things and one of the lessons from the BT Cowpea story in Nigeria, to go back to it again, is that it serves to shine a light on where there are opportunities for improvement in other systems. And I'll point to two of them, seed systems and agricultural extension. Seed systems from the point of view of being able to meet the demand that farmers now have for new products, and seed systems from the point of view of being able to deliver quality. Meeting the demand, this session is about putting it in perspective, so let's put some of the scale in perspective. With cowpeas in Nigeria, 3.7 million hectares of cowpeas are grown every year in Nigeria. That means 74,000 tons of seed has to go into the ground every year. This year, with the release of BT Cowpea, 7.5 tons of seed was made available. A very, very tiny fraction of the total amount of cowpea that's being planted every year. Next year, if everything goes exceptionally well, there might be 30 tons of BT Cowpea seed available for farmers. Still a fraction of a percent of the total amount of seed that's needed. What are the bottlenecks, if you will, right now? It's early seed generation. So producing early generation seed. Right now, foundation seed is only allowed to be produced, or is able to be produced, by the institute IAR, the research institute. The commercial seed companies, which are allowed to sell the certified seed to farmers, are not in a position yet to be able to produce foundation seed. So that needs to be streamlined. We have to get the private sector involved, not only in selling the seed directly to farmers and end